Not too long ago, we talked about the top 20 best comic books of the 1970s. Today, we are going to go even further back to the 1960s, the era of Vietnam, political assassinations, the moon landing, famous civil rights movements, and the Batman Adam West TV show, which I'm sure we can kind of forget about just for today. The 1960s was also a pivotal time in comic books, as we saw the emergence of a new breed of superheroes, born from the anxieties of nuclearization. A new breed of superheroes which rode the wave of 1960s counterculture. Today, I bring you the top 20 best comic books of the 1960s. Right here, right now, coming at you. Hello, Asgardians and Midgardians alike, Dante D here, bringing you all another video, and welcome to the channel where we talk about comic books and other geek stuff. So today I want to get right into this list, but I want to give you a little bit of a background on the 1960s in comic books first. So obviously, the 1960s was preceded by the 50s, which was the Eisenhower era, and this was a little bit of a bland era. The United States was in the middle of a Cold War, and people felt that a great way to combat communism and the Soviets is to just reaffirm their own way of life. Therefore, at this time, you saw a lot of conformity. You could really see this culture of conformity illustrated in 1950s comic books, but we'll talk a little bit more about that when we do our top 20 best comics of the 1950s video. By the 1960s, people were really getting a clue, and they started questioning their government. They were questioning whether that war in Asia was really that necessary, and they were starting to realize that conformity does not always necessarily mean good. And this, of course, you can really see in 1960s comics. Now, by the 1960s, an era that collectors often refer to as the Silver Age of comics was at its height. But another name that you often hear for the 1960s era is the Marvel Age of comics. And if you've read some 1960s Marvel comic books, you will often see at the bottom of some of their comics, this is the Marvel Age of comics. And that wasn't just a sales tactic. The 1960s really was the Marvel Age of comics. They were just so prolific during the 1960s, and they were just doing a lot of revolutionary things with their books and their characters that were never done before in the comic book industry, and that launched them to superstardom, not only in the 60s, but in the 70s, 80s, and beyond. So with that in mind, naturally, you're going to see more Marvel books on this list in comparison to DC books. And one last note about our list today, the books that you're going to see here were chosen based on cultural significance, not monetary values. Our first book, coming in at number 20, is Daredevil #1 from 1964, and this is the first appearance of Daredevil. Now, Daredevil is a character that never really became as popular as some of the other characters at Marvel Comics. He was kind of more of a B-list character, but he definitely sold well enough to survive throughout the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, and he definitely had quite a few epic runs, such as the Frank Miller run, and now Daredevil's really getting a lot of love present day, especially with the Daredevil Netflix series. And I think Daredevil's also the first Catholic superhero. I can't really think of any other superheroes that are Catholic, but you can really see at this time Marvel experimenting a little bit with diversity in their books. Number 19, we actually have two books in this spot, and they're both Batman books. The first being Batman #139 from 1961, featuring the first appearance of Batgirl. And the second is Batman #181 from 1966, featuring the first appearance of Poison Ivy. And I believe these are the only two Batman books from the 1960s that feature the appearance of major Batman characters. I cannot really think of any other major Batman characters that appeared during the 1960s. See, the 60s was a kind of a weird time for Batman. I mean, DC had a lot of success with Batman for a brief period of time with the Adam West TV show. And I know I said I wasn't going to mention that, but here I go again. But anyways, other than that TV show, which was very short-lived, the 1960s was kind of boring for Batman. I just thought the stories to be quite subpar, and this is coming from a huge Batman fan. You really don't start to see an improvement in Batman, at least in my opinion, until the 1970s. Number 18, we have The Amazing Spider-Man, number 14 from 1964, featuring the first appearance of the Green Goblin. Green Goblin, I would argue, is to Spider-Man what the Joker is to Batman. He is Peter Parker's biggest pain in the ass, and he has contributed so much to the Amazing Spider-Man story and the Amazing Spider-Man lore. I mean, we have just had some great stories featuring the great Green Goblin over the year, and I would argue that he is one of the greatest villains of all time. Number 17, we have Marvel Superheroes, number 18 from 1969, and this features the first appearance of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And these were not the most popular characters and wasn't the most popular series throughout the 60s and 70s. However, the Guardians of the Galaxy did have a large enough following. Number 16, we have Strange Tales, number 110 from 1963, featuring the first appearance of Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange is a character who he didn't make a huge impression right off the bat, but he did develop in popularity over the years to the point where he was eventually given his own series. And from what I hear, the Doctor Strange series from the 70s was just stellar. I haven't read it myself, but I will eventually get around to it because people tell me it's just awesome. If you've read that Doctor Strange, any Doctor Strange series that you really enjoyed, please let me know in the comments. Fantastic Four number 52 from 1966, and this features the first appearance of the Black Panther, and this was a pivotal moment in Marvel Comics. The mid to late 60s was really a tumultuous time and a time of great protest and a lot of civil rights movement. Marvel kind of capitalized on that a bit and introduced one of the first black superheroes, and Black Panther became very popular. I know I did a video on the Black Panther a while ago, and if you're interested, the link is in the description. But if in case you were wondering, the Black Panther superhero, at least according to Stan Lee, was not related or named after the Black Panther Party, which was a civil rights group. Fantastic Four number 5 from 1962, featuring the first appearance of Dr. Doom. And Dr. Doom is a villain who is extremely popular. He was very popular in his early days, and he remains popular to this day. People just love Dr. Doom, and that is why he appears on this list. He's just a pop cultural icon. In our number 13 spot, we have Green Lantern issue number 1 from 1960. Now, this is not the first appearance of the Green Lantern, which was in All American Comics, nor is this the first modern appearance of the Green Lantern, which was in, I believe, Showcase 22, which came out in the 1950s, and that's why it is not on this list. But this is, I believe, the first Green Lantern solo series in the modern era. And this is one of the most significant books that DC released in the 1960s. Justice League of America number 1 from 1960. And this is the first Justice League solo series ever. Okay, so this is another one of those hugely significant books that DC released in the 1960s, and there are few of them, but this is definitely one of them. And the Justice League of America is arguably the first, I believe is the first superhero team ever. They even predate the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. Speaking of superhero teams, in our number 11 spot, we have the Uncanny X-Men number 1 from 1963. This is the first ever appearance of the Uncanny X-Men. And the reason why this isn't higher up in the list is because X-Men initially was not really that popular of a book. I mean, they were popular enough to continue publication throughout the 1960s, but the X-Men did not rise to the prominence and the significance that they have nowadays until the 1970s with the John Byrne, Chris Claremont epic run on X-Men. Number 10, we have the Fantastic Four, number 48, which is the first appearance of not only Galactus, but also the Silver Surfer. Galactus, awesome villain, eats a lot of planets and is giant. And then we also have the Silver Surfer, who to me is a little bit of an underrated character. I absolutely love the Silver Surfer, and later on, I believe it was in 1968, the Silver Surfer was actually given his own solo series, and that solo series was a fantastic read. I think the Silver Surfer is one of the most important characters that appeared in the 1960s because he really was a product of 1960s culture. You have surfing that was really popular in the 60s, so they decided to take a character and stick him on a surfboard. On top of that, the Silver Surfer, he's not a lame character. He's actually very serious, and he really is philosophical in the way he talks. I would even go so far as to call the Silver Surfer the poster boy for 1960s ideology. Oftentimes you see him brooding in his books about why human beings are so violent, why they wage war against each other, why they're so corrupt. And he just really kind of encompasses all those ideas of love and peace very nicely. And of course, these ideas were very popular at the time. Avengers number 4 from 1964. This is the first Silver Age appearance of Captain America. And this is a very significant book, a really watershed book in the 1960s, because if you know anything about comic book history, you know that for a while, superheroes essentially kind of disappeared off the face of the planet because people weren't interested in reading superheroes for a bit. This was especially true during the 1950s. With this book here, you really get the sense that superheroes are back and they are here to stay. And Marvel was really kind of instrumental in that superhero resurgence of the 1960s, and this is that book I feel that kind of illustrates that perfectly. Number 8, we have The Brave and the Bold, number 28 from 1960, and this is the first appearance of the Justice League of America. And as I mentioned earlier, the Justice League of America was likely the first superhero team ever. If you can think of another superhero team that predates the Justice League, let me know in the comments, but I'm pretty sure they were the first superhero team ever, and that is super significant. The Justice League of America is essentially the progenitor for superhero teams. There's actually an interesting story that Martin Goodman, the then publisher of Marvel Comics, used to golf with the publisher of DC, and they were kind of chatting about current trends in the industry and what was really kind of working out, and the publisher of DC said, you know what, Martin, I think you guys should do a book on superhero teams because I think that's what's selling right now. And Martin Goodman then went to Stan Lee and said, you need to give me a book on a team of superheroes. And what followed was the Fantastic Four. And after the Fantastic Four, you see the X-Men. And then in the 70s, you get the Defenders and the Champions. And there are just all these teams of superheroes that followed. Number 7, we have Journey into Mystery, number 83 from 1962, featuring the first appearance of Thor, the God of Thunder. Seriously, you cannot talk about Thor without doing the voice that accompanies it. Sorry if that's a bad impression. I just love doing the whole deep voice thing, and I love how they poke fun at that too. In the Infinity War movie, where you have Chris Pratt trying to do the deep voice thing, it was just hilarious.
You will not be taking our pod today, sir.
Well, are you making your voice deeper?
This is my voice.
But anyway, this book here, obviously Thor needs no introduction whatsoever. He's one of the most popular characters, even to this day, and he appeared for the very first time in this book here, and that is why it is on the list. Tales of Suspense 39 from 1963, featuring the first appearance of Iron Man. And this, again, is another heavy hitter book from the 1960s. Everyone knows Iron Man, another character who doesn't need any introduction. This is the first time he appeared, and clearly the reason why he is so high up on this list. Incredible Hulk #1 from 1962. This is obviously the first appearance of the Incredible Hulk, and to me, this is probably one of the most important books of the 1960s because the Hulk represents heroes of the atomic age perfectly, because as we all know, the Hulk got his powers from nuclear testing, right? He was belted by gamma rays. The Hulk was created kind of as a modern day Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and unfortunately the first Incredible Hulk series only lasted 6 issues. Now I don't know the exact reason as to why it was canceled so early. I guess probably just didn't have that great of sales. Maybe kids were afraid of them. I'm not really sure. If you know a little bit more about that, please let me know in the comments. But even though the first series was canceled, the Hulk was still very much alive in the Marvel Universe. He became one of the founding members of the Avengers. He guest starred in the Fantastic Four, the Amazing Spider-Man, and eventually, Stan Lee got a letter from a college dormitory saying that these college students decided to use the Incredible Hulk as their mascot. So it was at that point that Stan Lee realized that the Hulk was actually gaining a lot of popularity from college-aged readers, which is pretty significant because before this, as we all know, comics were pretty much more associated with children. So afterwards, the Hulk became a regular in the Tales to Astonish series, and then by the 1970s, he was given his own title once again. Avengers #1 from 1963, featuring the first appearance of the beloved Avengers. This is another heavy hitter book from the 1960s and the Silver Age of comics as a whole. The Avengers was a cultural phenomenon back then and continues to be a huge cultural phenomenon today with, you know, merchandise, the movies, the comics, just everything. The Avengers is very much ingrained in our culture, and that is why I believe this book here is so significant. In our #3 spot, we have The Amazing Spider-Man #1 from 1963. Now, this isn't the first appearance of The Amazing Spider-Man. However, this is the first Spider-Man solo series, and I was actually reading this book the other day, and I actually posted under the community tab why Peter Parker's name in I think it was the 3rd story, the Chameleon story, was written as Peter Palmer, and you guys were all great. Y'all told me I think it was just a mistake. You know, Stan Lee was writing a lot of characters back then. He had a hard time keeping track of everybody's name. It was just really kind of funny to see Peter Parker written as Peter Palmer. But anyway, Spider-Man, everybody knows Spider-Man. He is another cultural phenomenon, not only in North American culture, but internationally. I'm sure you can go to pretty much any country in the world and most people know who Spider-Man is. He is arguably the most popular superhero on the planet. I don't know, Superman may surpass him, but Spider-Man is definitely in the top 3. When I think top 3 superheroes, I think Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. They definitely take the cake. You can argue whoever you think is in the #1 spot, but I'm sure you would agree that those 3 there are the top 3 superheroes of all time. And Spider-Man is just a character that just raked in the dough for Marvel in the 60s all the way through to present day. He's just an icon and probably the best piece of property that Marvel Comics can own. In our #2 spot, we have the Fantastic Four #1 from 1961. And this is not only the first appearance of the Fantastic Four, but this is essentially the birth of the Marvel Universe. These are among the first characters that appear in this new universe that Stan Lee created. So he created the Fantastic Four, then with all the other characters that he created afterwards, they all appeared in the same universe as the Fantastic Four. They started appearing in each other's books, and this was never really done before. This was just really revolutionary. And on top of it, the Fantastic Four was a team of superheroes that introduced that whole superheroes with problems thing. I mean, Stan Lee oftentimes would refer to them as superheroes with clay feet, superheroes with flaws, and that just really made these characters a lot more interesting because they weren't these all-powerful godlike beings that didn't have any problems. They were just more interesting to read, and it was easier for a lot of readers to identify with them. And finally, in our number 1 spot, I'm sure you've guessed it, is Amazing Fantasy number 15 from 1962, featuring the first ever appearance of Spider-Man. And I had a hard time kind of deciding who was going to be in the number 1 spot. For me, it was between Fantastic Four number 1 and Amazing Fantasy 15. And yes, Fantastic Four was the basically the birth of the Marvel Universe. But when you compare Spider-Man to the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man is just a character who is a lot more popular than the Fantastic Four. He is, like I said a little earlier on, one of the most popular characters of all time. And even though the Fantastic Four kind of introduced that concept of characters with clay feet and characters with flaws and problems, I think when you think characters with problems, you think of Peter Parker, right? Because if there is one character that I believe has a lot of problems, it is Peter Parker. Like, literally, this guy cannot catch a break, and I'm sure most of us could identify with that. You know, there's some days when we're just like, frick, I cannot catch a break. And that is also why I decided to put this book in the number 1 spot. So that about does it for our list today. I really hope that you enjoyed it. And do you agree with this list? Are there any other books that didn't appear on this list that you feel should have appeared? Please let me know in the comments. And as always, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing and check out the channel for other great videos on topics related to geek culture. Until next time, this is Dante D signing off. I will see you all in the next episode.